Hello everyone, welcome to Reboot and Rise with MLR. In this video, we are going to explore another key building block of Java program. Let's first understand what happens behind the scenes when you do something like a sign up for an app or purchasing a product online. When you click on a button on your mobile screen, the request doesn't go straight to our Java programs running in the server machine. It first travels to something called as Akamai. It's a content delivery network, and that speeds up content delivery and reduces the latency. From there, it's routed to APZ, an API gateway, and which is responsible for routing, security, and analytics. Next, the request reaches to load balancer and hosted on cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, or Google, which distributes the traffic to one of the available backend servers where your Java programs running. That's this way. Eventually, your request lands on backend server instance running a Java-based RESTful services, and this is where your Java REST API comes into play. If the request involves storing and retrieving data, then the Java service interact with the databases. And if your request needs data from another external system, then it process continues through that system API gateway and that system internal load balancer until it finally completes its data process completion. So this is what a typical end-to-end request flow looks like in a modern cloud architecture. Now let's zoom in and understand what happens within the Java application itself. In Java application that exposes REST API, the flow usually looks like a controller layer, and the controller layer receives the HTTP request, then it forwards the request to service layer, and where the actual business logic that is executed. From there, the request is passed to DAO, that is a data access object layer, which directly interact with database. So when you submit a form or perform an action on your mobile device, the request comes to our REST API controller, and your data flows from the device to controller, and then to the service, and then to the DAO, and finally to the database. But in this process, where does your data go while it is moving through these layers from service to from controller to service to DAO? It has to store temporarily, and it has to store temporarily in the memory before it's sending to the database, or it is returning to the user. Example, if you are reading data, then read from the database, come to DAO, from DAO to service layer, and service to controller, then it goes to user. So if you want to store your data that is coming from user to our Java programs, we need something called as container. That's where variables comes into picture. So think of like a variables as a container. So whenever the data comes into, so whenever data comes from user devices to our Java program, so these container or these variables act as containers, and they store temporarily and hold the data temporarily until your program execution completion. Like the request flows here, the data flows here, and then get the response back. So until the transaction completed, the data will be stored or held by these container, or called as Java variables. Okay. In Java, we have four main types of variables. One is instance variable, another one is static variable, local variable, and parameter variable. So instance variable generally, like we use this one inside a object. So if you want to store a specific value to a specific object, then we use instance variable. In case if you want to store some data into a variable, but that can be shared across multiple objects or multiple instances, then we can have it as a static variable. And if you want to store a data and that is within the method, and the scope is within the method, that means once the method execution completes, then the variable will be then the data will be removed from the RAM memory. So if you want to pass a value to a method, then we use these parameter variables. Okay, but don't worry, like if I mean like don't worry if you don't understand what is instance variable, what is static variable, what is local variable, parameter variable. For now, just remember these four names. I will cover later once we start object oriented. So for now, remember a variable means like it is used to hold some data during the program execution, and then once the program execution completed, the data will be erased from the memory. Okay. Next, let's see how do we declare or how do we write variables in the Java program. So in the Java program, generally in Java program, so we use data type followed by variable name. Here I'm just declaring a variable name. I'm not assigning any value. That means you just have an empty container. There is no value inside or there is no data inside. And the second one is if you say like declaring and assigning, this is where you are declaring a variable name with data type and you are assigning value. So this is like a empty container where no data. This is like a container and you are putting some data inside. And this is where it's assigning. Okay. And then if you want to have a variable inside a method parameter, then method name, and then within the bracket we go with the data type variable name. We will talk about this data type later part, I mean like in the next upcoming videos, so more clearly what exactly data type, why do we need data type. Okay, so these variables, I mean remember these variables are the foundation for working with data in your program. Data means something like a username, password, email, phone number, anything that is coming from a user or that is something you are reading from database. These variables plays a major role in order to hold the data during that program execution. Okay, let's see like where exactly we write these programs and what places they are. Okay, so assume like we are writing a program called as product class. Inside a product class, if you want to write instance variables, so always remember instance variables we have to write outside the method, not inside the method. So it should be within the class, outside a method. Okay. And when we write this variable name here, in this case, like I'm writing name and whose data type is string, I'm writing a name whose data type is double. These variables called as instance variables. Okay. Then if we go with a variable name, data type, and if we have a static keyword in front, then that is a static variable. So both instance variables and static variables you write within the class but outside the method. And I'm writing some method called as calculate discount price and return some double. So now this is a method, whatever highlighted one, this is a method. And any variable you write within this method, from here, from this line, if you declare any variable like example final price double, this is a local variable. Okay. And any variable if you write here as a method parameter, in this case coupon code is a parameter variable. Understand? So instance variable and static variable you write outside a method, and method parameters you write here, and within this method after this open curly brace and before this close curly brace, if you write any variable, those are nothing but local variables. So this is where we write variables. And do not worry if you don't understand other parts like Akamai, APC, load balancer and all. Just try to understand how the flow happens in the real time. We will discuss about all those components once we complete our core Java. When we are learning about REST APIs and deploying into cloud, we will talk about and we will learn all those things. Okay. So in the upcoming videos, we will deep dive into the data type and other parts. But for now, for this discussion or for this video, but for now, just try to understand what is a variable and why we need a variable, types of variables we have, and how do we declare a variable inside Java program. Okay. So, and finally remember, the data is a fuel for your Java program. Not only Java program, for any programming, data is a fuel. We need to store the data into a variable in order to write any logic. So if the data is a fuel, variables are the containers that keep your Java program running smoothly. Okay. So that's it for this discussion. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning, keep coding. Thank you.